Hi there, this is Anu, and welcome to the Breaking Bias Summit. I am so thrilled to have with me here my dear friend, Scott Shigeoka, who is an internationally recognized curiosity expert, speaker, and award-winning author of Seek, How Curiosity Can Transform Your Life and Change the World. Seek was an Amazon Best Book of 2023, Porchlight Best Business Book winner, and a must-read book by the Next Big Idea Club. Scott has appeared on The Today Show, NPR, BBC, Harvard Business Review, The Guardian, and so many other outlets around the world to spread the gospel of curiosity, which is what we'll be talking about today. He's also known for popularizing research that promotes positive well-being and relationships around the globe, including UC Berkeley's Greater Good Science Center, and through his groundbreaking courses at the University of Texas at Austin. He's originally from Hawaii, one of my favorite places in the world,
Mine too.
and he's also a screenwriter, a playwright with two major projects in development. Oh my goodness, Scott. Well, first of all, thank you for joining us,
Oh my God, yes. Thank you for having me.
and welcome. And I've actually wanted to do this ever since we met, like
Mm,
8 or 9 years ago.
mm,
And I knew this was going to happen as like queer people, Asian descent,
yeah.
working across the globe, really thinking through um, how do we get ourselves out of this rut?
Yeah. Our secret chamber in which we all like convene in to talk about, all the things we're going to do together is small and it is magical and sparkly. And it makes me excited to do things like this
Yes.
with the
And
community.
the coolest thing is everyone else is invited to the secret chamber right
Yeah, it
now. So
is. And you just have to know the password. And the password is what's the password? The password is breaking bias.
breaking bias, that's right.
Also pretend
And
over your breath. Yeah,
curiosity.
yeah. And also seek. Yeah.
Yes. Seek. So one thing that I wanted to ask you is like, as someone who's been thinking, feeling, researching, speaking
Mm,
to people, collecting people's stories for so long around this idea of curiosity, um, with curiosity, in one word or a phrase, how do you feel about bias in our society today?
mm, mm. Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of the I feel like we're in this era of incuriosity. That's what I read about in the book,
Yeah.
where curiosity is a desire to know, and so incuriosity is the absence of that. It is to essentially say, "I know everything I need to know about you, so there's nothing
Yes.
else I need to know. There's nothing else I could possibly be curious about."
Yeah.
And I feel like that is one of the narratives that's very prevalent today in our world and in our country and in our communities and in our families. You can kind of scale it up or down. And
Yeah.
we're turning away from people, right? We're turning away from them because we have our own judgments, we have our disagreements with them. And sometimes we take it to such an extreme that we're canceling them. We're saying,
Yeah.
we're going to block you. I'm going to block you on social media. I'm going to block you from my life.
Yeah.
I'm not going to talk to you again.
Yeah.
Or we are so enraged, or we have so many emotions about the disagreements we have
Yeah.
politically or, perspectives wise, that we remove their dignity as a person. We say,
Yeah.
I want you to know how wrong you are, and I'm going to show you in
Yeah.
in a way that can be really harmful and that can
Yeah.
actually strip someone from their human dignity. And
Yeah.
I really love what folks like you are doing, what folks like my friend and mentor John Powell are doing in the world around
Yeah.
how do we move towards a sense of belonging without having to other people, without
Yeah.
dehumanizing them, because we can disagree without destroying one another. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah,
It's like the trance of separation that we
yeah,
get stuck in. And I
yeah.
feel like curiosity is the bridge, right? We
Mm,
feel separate from one another across our identities, whether
mm,
it's race, ethnicity, sexuality, gender, you name it, right?
mm,
Political beliefs.
mm,
And curiosity is stifled when we're
yeah,
in separation, in this comparing mind.
yeah.
Um, so, yeah, that's really well said. And then if we come to this place of imagination, again, curiosity,
Yeah.
how would you feel in a world without bias, a world
Mm.
where belonging replaces bias?
Yeah, I love this idea of closing our imagination gaps. Like, how do we envision a world where, what what could be possible versus what we need to change. I think we have to look at it in both directions, not just see what's wrong, but also see what could be right in the world. And I think that, a world where we're turning towards one another and we're saying, there's so much more that I can know about you, whether I have been in a loving romantic partnership of 20 years with you or whether I'm meeting you for the very first time.
Yeah.
There's so much more that I can learn about you. There's so much more unfolding. I recognize that you are constantly changing, that the world we are in is constantly changing. And so I want to come with you, not with judgment and not with my own bias, but with an expanded aperture, with a curiosity of actually understanding, who are you really? I want to dive beneath the surface and I want to get to know who you are as a person.
Yeah.
And I like to say that you can penetrate the layers of a human and reach their soul with curiosity. It's soulful work, and so that's what I see. I see the soulful work of us turning towards one another, understanding one another, building those bridges, like you said, connecting with one another. I mean, that seems like a really beautiful world. And that world isn't one where we always agree. In fact, we're going to disagree.
Yeah.
And polarization is not necessarily a bad thing. It is good to have tension and conflict so long as it's not toxic, because we need to know what's not working. We need to know what behaviors and actions are harmful. But we can't close ourselves off from new information or new perspectives or new people. We have to stay open. We have to stay curious.
It's so beautiful. And the image I got around curiosity being, it almost felt like it's like a drill to get us to the core of our souls. And like we're just encased with layers and layers of stories, and curiosity lets us really get there. And, in the PRISM toolkit, the 5 tools that help us in unlearning bias and breaking bias, individuation is basically the scientific name for curiosity, because individuation is really about dissociating group-based associations from an individual. How do we do that? With interest, with curiosity. And I'm curious, as you reflect on this idea of, kind of building these bridges across the soul, at the soul level across people, this is soulful work. Can we also do that for ourselves? Because oftentimes we as humans forget that we also don't know ourselves fully.
Yeah, totally. I think that, there's multiple directions to curiosity, right? There's this outward curiosity, which is what we're talking about. How do I get curious about you? How do you get curious about me? But then what I love that you're bringing into the conversation is this inward curiosity. How do I get really curious about myself so that I can arrive at the same place that I would with another person, which is to deeply understand myself. And through that understanding often comes healing, often comes self-acceptance, self-compassion, and love. I use the L word a lot. Love.
I love the L word.
Yeah, I love the L word too. I'm like, listen up, in these corporate settings. I'm about to bring in the L word. Get ready.
Yeah.
Because that is so much of what we are fueled on, in our humanity. And also I think about, if love is a verb, right? I hear that adage a lot, like love is a verb. It's like, okay, well, what's the verb? Like, how do you actually do it? And so for me, curiosity is the verb, right? Like love is curiosity. Curiosity is love. When you turn towards someone else and you are genuinely interested in who they are as a person, and you want to penetrate those layers of stories and their humanity and see them for who they really are, or you extend that inward towards yourself. And you really give curiosity in that space for curiosity towards yourself, you are extending love. You're extending love to that other person. You're extending love to yourself. And in many ways, it's also liberation. It's the other L word, right? Because you're encased. Bias to me is a prison that we encase ourselves in, right? And we can free ourselves off from what can sometimes feel like a protective mechanism or a defense mechanism, and a control mechanism, and release ourselves to actually see ourselves and to see others as they truly are, rather than through the painted veil of bias. And so to me, I see it as a form of love and liberation. Yeah.
It's so beautiful. And I really feel like curiosity is almost like a vehicle that we get into. And the destination is love and liberation. And curiosity is the vehicle that gets us there. So as you were sharing that, I mean, I'm very image driven when it comes to visualizations. So it was really beautiful to kind of listen to as you describe that.
But it ain't
analogy.
no self-driving vehicle, you know, it takes
Yes, nope.
work, you know, you
You
gotta,
have to drive the vehicle.
yeah, it's like, this ain't no Tesla. Okay, you gotta like, it's like a bicycle. You gotta get on that
Oh, I
saddle,
like that.
and it's gonna take some work, and it's gonna get
Yeah,
easier and easier the more and more you practice it, because it's a muscle. You know what I mean?
yeah,
So I would, yeah, it's a bike, and it's not, and instead of a windshield, you know, like that's what I love about biking around the city is like, you know, you're just seeing the world as it is. It's not through like
yeah.
the glass veil. You know, the sun can actually hit you, and you can
Hit you
actually
and
get
you feel
vitamin
the
D from
wind
it.
in your hair, and
Yeah, exactly. It's just so much more immersive. You know what I mean? And I think
yeah,
that's what curiosity is. It's like this
yeah.
really beautiful immersion into the lived experience. Yeah.
It's beautiful. So, you know, the way I define bias is that it's a learned habit,
Mm,
and
mm,
this learned habit can be unlearned,
mhm,
and curiosity is one of the ways. Um, so, one of the things I was really curious to learn about is how did you fall into the realm of curiosity, and not just like talking about it, but researching it to the extent you wrote a book about it,
mm,
to kind of really explore its different dimensions.
mm, mm.
Where did it start?
I will share the origin story. I also am so curious about what you just said. Like, I want to better understand how curiosity sort of unwinds our biases and like how that
Yeah,
works. Like, I want to like, I'm very curious about that. So like, let's flag
perfect.
that, and I want to hear that
Let's
from you.
parking lot that right now.
But the origin story of my curiosity journey started really when I went on a curiosity voyage after the
Okay.
2016 elections here in the
Um,
US, went across the country because I felt in my own family, in my own communities that I, you know, was in, that there's so much fracture and so much social division that's happening, not
yeah,
even just across politics, but also across many other forms of identities.
yeah.
You know, whether that's, you know, faith-based, age-based, you know, things like okay boomer, you know, there's just like
Hmm.
lots of like pushing people into boxes and pushing those boxes very far away from us if we don't
Yeah,
understand them or if we disagree with them, right? And
yeah.
so I wanted to do that for myself. I said, I do that. I do that of putting people in boxes. I also discriminate people because I don't know their stories and
Wow.
I don't know who they
Yeah,
are. So I need to get my butt. This time it was a real vehicle, it's a Toyota Prius, and I need to
of
travel across
course.
the country, you know, in my little California cliche, my Toyota Prius, and I need to use my own curiosity to better understand, you know, why are we so divided as a country, and like what are the ways that we could possibly heal? What are the ways that we can possibly
Mm,
bridge these divides? How are people doing that? So I went to, you know, Trump rallies, like one in Minnesota. I went and lived in rural Appalachia in the rural South for months at a time. And
yeah.
I, you know, traveled to a convent where I met, you know, folks from the Nuns and Nuns group that,
Wow.
you know, millennials that were spiritually diverse living with Catholic sisters. You know, I met folks who I never would have met, end of life doulas
Okay.
and wildland firefighters. And I was just like, how do I get out of my own bubble, my San Francisco Bay Area bubble where I've lived in for most of my adult life, and the bubble that is Hawaii, which is this beautiful, richly diverse place, but is only one of the many islands and spaces across the world. How do I understand what
Yeah.
else is out here? And it was a journey of curiosity through the lived experience. And I had so many
Wow.
remarkable experiences, made so many new relationships, many of whom I'm still talking to this
Yeah.
day. And I pushed myself to get out of my comfort zone and try to really bridge the divide for myself on the road. Yeah.
Well, that sounds like you were breaking bias,
Mm,
your journey of curiosity was breaking bias because
yeah.
you gave yourself permission to really be with the other,
Mm,
and be in close proximity and close contact and
mm,
now friendship and
mm,
relationships with others. But, I'm really curious. Let's just go over the first three examples.
mhm,
Like, how does a queer Asian American man
mhm,
go to a Trump rally?
mm, 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 mm.
And what did you have to do to prepare yourself for that?
Yeah.
And what was your experience like? You know?
Yeah, it was wild because like right around that time, I went to an Avett Brothers concert with my then partner, and in Minnesota, in a small town. It was at a big venue though, and this group of guys basically were harassing us. I mean, they were threatening us, and they were saying, you know, we don't want to see you holding hands. We don't want to see that shit. Cut that out. Because we were holding hands and like, you know, with each other
Mhm.
during a love song of a very inclusive band. I was so confused
Yeah.
about the whole situation. But you know, I think that I was not in a moment there to be curious about, hey, like,
Mhm.
what's going on here? Like, why are you, you know, threatening us? You know, I was there to just enjoy the show. And I think that's an important
Yeah.
thing about curiosity, is that it has its boundaries, it has its limits. And, you know,
Yeah.
your physical safety is really, really key and important. So if you don't have that, you don't,
Yeah.
you know, no one deserves um, curiosity. It is really earned, right, in many ways. So you have to have that trust in that relationship in order for that curiosity to really, you know, come
Yeah.
alive. So we just like moved to like a different part of the venue, and we had a fine
Yeah.
experience. But I was like coming in with this sort of experience, you know, to the Trump rally. So I was really fearful and anxious. I was like, oh gosh, like what's going to happen? Like, am
Yeah.
I like putting myself in another situation like this?
Yeah.
But I went in and I, you know, went up to, you know, this huge line going into the Target Center Arena, the tens of thousands of people there. And I just walked up to, I didn't know anyone there. I was dressed in my like very flamboyant, colorful self. And I just like walked up to someone and I said, hey, you know, I'm Scott. I'm not from here. I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm not voting for Trump, but I'm actually a Democrat and progressive. But I want to better understand people who
Mm.
are voting for Trump out of true curiosity, because the only stories I hear come from the media or come from other people. But I know as a storyteller, the best place to learn about someone is to ask them
Mm.
yourself.
Yeah.
You know, we're waiting in line for 4 or 5 hours. Like, would you be open to having a conversation? And they looked
Yeah.
at me with this, you know, like they were so taken aback, you know, like in a good way. They were so,
Yeah.
well, I'm so used to people like you, in air quotes, right? Like
Yeah.
pushing back on me, or, you know, making me feel judged because of who I'm voting
Yeah.
for. You're actually coming in with curiosity. And they started to answer some of the questions I had about who they were, where they were from, you know, like their origin stories. And we just started to talk. And I started to see, you know, not just a caricature of who I thought like half
Yeah.
of America is, but, you know, who someone is, you know, as a person, beyond just who they're voting for in the next election.
Yeah.
Right? And that was like a really revealing experience. And then there was like this sort of back and forth curiosity, which I later would find in the literature, like curiosity is contagious. So when I asked them questions, they started to ask me questions, and they
Yeah.
had never met someone like me, and they were just same
Yeah.
thing, learning a lot from me. And I think they're caricatures of who an Asian, queer, progressive person were also doing.
Yeah.
So it was like a beautiful exchange, actually. Yeah, in many of those conversations.
And it's so powerful, right? Because you're describing so many different aspects of curiosity, and you know, you showed up with authenticity. Like you weren't pretending to be a journalist or something else. You were
No.
just like, hey, I'm just a regular person who happens to be from a different part of the country, and I'm curious, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And the other thing that I really love is that by being yourself, you gave others the permission to be themselves, but
Mm,
simultaneously, um, you also gave them a mental model
mm,
of
mm,
like, oh, I like Scott. You know, he's like the person that is generally demonized in my circles, but I actually like him because when I get to know him, he's just like me.
mm.
You know, he's got friends. You know, he likes coffee. You know, he likes to do whatever, right? Whatever the commonalities
Yeah.
that are there. But I want to kind of back up a little bit to something more like not more powerful, like, but something that's really potent for a lot of our viewers and listeners, which is that, you know, experience that you had at the concert,
Mhm,
which was, you know, really about lack of safety and absence of safety,
mhm, mhm,
in like being yourself. And in that moment, like, of course, fight flight hits. We're like, oh my gosh, my being is threatened. Of
mhm,
course, you know,
mhm,
as a result, we do what we need to do, which thankfully you and your partner did. But in those moments, how can curiosity help us, not immediately in that moment because our nervous system is triggered, but in processing that
mhm,
afterwards?
mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
because oftentimes I find that when that's happened to me, or I've heard other people, you know, experiencing something similar, they really internalize it
Mm,
and they
mm.
kind of remain in anger. And there's nothing wrong with any of those things.
Yeah,
But,
yeah.
you know, for me, anger is really uncomfortable,
Mm,
you know? like the Buddha said, like, you know, anger is like a basically like a heat, like a burning coal.
Mm,
It only
mm,
burns your hand.
mm.
So I feel like, and I found that true for myself. So how can curiosity be a tool for us um, in those
Yeah.
moments?
Oh, I mean, I was definitely angry. Like I was definitely
Yeah,
angry and I was
yeah,
definitely sad. But I was
yeah.
also feeling that like superhuman impulse of wanting to like judge them and be like,
Mm,
fuck these people. Like, why are they like this? Like, why are they doing this to me? Like, I deserve to be
yeah.
at the show too. So that anger was really like a revolutionary force that was trying to like create a boundary and create protection for me. But I had to
Yeah.
also sort of advance from that stage into,
Wow.
one that also included compassion and say, okay,
Mm,
well, is this anger actually going to change anything, especially for myself? Like, is this going to, like you said, is this going to
right.
make me feel better, make my then partner feel better? Are we still going to feel safe to go to these kinds of shows, which are really important to us?
Yeah.
Am I going to feel safe to continue on this journey, moving forward? Because I was like not even a couple months into the 12-month journey at that time. And
Wow.
so I think I really had to express a lot of curiosity towards myself, that inward curiosity, and say,
Mm,
what are the ways that I can protect myself as I move through this experience in the future? What are the things that they might have been feeling, at that time, their own discomforts or their own biases that they might have had? What are the ways that I'm really proud of myself and my then partner for showing up in that space? What are how am I grateful for that other part of the venue that actually received us and celebrated
yeah.
us feel safe? So I started to not just hyper focus on the one breaking moment, but I started to see that as a part of this huge mosaic of different
Beautiful.
experiences that happened, which made me hold the experience more fully and more honestly.
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes it's easier for us to put that one moment on the pedestal of how something was broken, either inside of
Yeah.
ourselves or community, but then to forget all of the other good stuff that happened. And that's what I also love about curiosity. It reminds us to look for the good as well. It reminds
Yeah.
us to look for what's working. It reminds us to look for, what is giving us strength and courage
Wow.
and delight. And it reminds us to, be curious about all the spectrum of emotions we're feeling, whether that is
Yeah.
sadness or anger, and to not come from a place of judgment, but instead come from a place of, what was that doing for me, or was that serving me?
Oh, wow. So powerful. And I feel like you used all five of the PRISM toolkits from like mindfulness,
Okay.
i.e. awareness, empathy and
There you go.
compassion, i.e. pro-social behaviors, of course, individuation, curiosity, and then stereotype replacement, right? Which is the
Mm,
S in the PRISM toolkit, which is, realizing that, yeah, there were some people that, you know, did offend us, that did harm us in some way, but moving to a different part of the same venue, there were
mm,
people that looked like them that welcomed us and embraced us.
yeah.
So, we can't judge a book by its cover, right? And that's one of the challenges with bias, is that we create this mental model and keep people imprisoned in them, of course, ourselves, but also others. And curiosity is really that bike we need to be riding and strengthening. I'm thinking about curiosity as like a spin class,
Oh, okay, yeah.
right? Amping it up and like
Ooh, I
when
love
needed.
that. What I love about that is it's like, because it's this individual, like grit-based exercise, but you're also in
Yeah,
community, which fuels you to want to do it more, because we do know that curiosity is also a cultural value. It's not just an individual value, and it's
yeah,
something that we can have in our families, in our workplaces, in our schools, in our communities.
yeah,
And I was also just thinking that, the connecting it to individuation, so much of what I love about that practice of individuating people is to remind yourself that the group identities that they belong to are not monolithic. So in other words,
yeah,
like two, Asian descent folks can be very different. Two queer
yeah,
folks can be very different. Two Trump voters can be very different. Two
yeah,
48-year-olds can be very different. Two, you know what I
yeah,
mean? Like the list goes on. Those identities do not define who you
yeah,
are. And so that's why I love the work of folks like Susan Fisk and Mary Wheeler, who say, think about what is a vegetable that this person likes? I didn't do this at the
Mhm.
concert or after the concert, but it is a helpful exercise to think about, okay, do they like broccolis or carrots? Because what you're
Yeah,
doing when you're thinking about their individual preferences is you're seeing them as a person, an individual
yeah,
that's not a part of this monolithic group identity, or it is not the whole represent, it's not represented wholly by this monolithic group
yeah,
identity. So you start to see their likes and dislikes and preferences, and you start to say, oh wow, like you have this humanity and this
yeah,
nuance just like
yeah,
I do. And I felt that with, my breakage from Christianity. Like I discriminated Christians for a very long time as a queer person who came from a more fundamental upbringing where my
mm,
queerness was, you know, transformed into shame and self-hatred,
wow,
and I was told that it was a sin and I was going to go to hell,
wow,
if that happened. So I actively discriminated and had prejudice towards people
wow,
who identified as Christians because I saw them as the people who harmed me in the past, and I said,
wow,
you all must be the same. But when I actually released from that and remembered, oh wait, like two Christians can be very different, there's very many ways to practice this and
yeah,
be in community and to share those principles. And so I remember being like in my mid 20s and going to a church and seeing a pride flag hanging outside of it, and I was like, what? And just meeting everyone there who were
yeah,
so supportive,
yeah,
loving towards me. And I was like, oh my gosh, wow, I don't have to run away from my spirituality, which I so deeply care about. I can actually be in community
yeah,
with it. So I think that practice is really, really helpful for us to stay
wow.
connected to the things we really care about.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. How powerful. And because you shared, just the harm that, in your faith community that was caused to you. So I grew up like Hindu Buddhist
Mm,
mostly,
mm,
and there was nothing like against homosexuality, but there was nothing for it. We were just invisible.
mm,
So I just basically was in the closet for most of my life. And the way I came out of the closet was because I went to a church
mm,
that I'm still a member of 15 years later. And what I like to say is, a drag queen opened the door to the church. It was Easter service. She had this fabulous hat on. And basically, my minister, Reverend Jackie Lewis, was preaching and going there for the next year, like on a weekly basis. She pulled me out of the closet,
mm,
literally
mm,
using the word of Jesus. I was like, oh,
mm, mm,
just as the same person, Jesus, can be used to like harm people, he can also be used to heal people, which
mm,
was certainly
mm,
the case for me. So
mm.
it is, something to kind of really reflect upon how powerful that is, and how there's just so much diversity in all of us, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's beautiful. Thanks for sharing that story. That's
Yeah, I
amazing.
know it's pretty, yeah,
And for having the courage to step into spaces that are very different from the ones that we grew up
yeah,
in, which can feel really comfortable for us to stay in those
yeah,
spaces that are familiar, but there's so much that can be offered to us that
yeah,
can literally change and revolutionize our entire way of seeing
yeah,
ourselves and being ourselves in the world when we get out of our comfort zone and go to spaces that are different from the ones that we're
yeah,
used to, and we meet
yeah,
wonderful humans like your minister and that drag queen and the entire congregation who
yeah,
opens up our hearts to be ourselves, which is what I think um, many, if not all of us want, is
yeah,
that feeling of love, both towards ourselves and from others and towards
yeah.
others. So yeah,
Yeah,
beautiful.
the church's tagline is just love.
Yeah.
So back to the L word.
Love, love. Yeah.
um, so one of the things that I was curious to hear your perspective on is like we're in another election season, right? Very similar to the one in 2016,
Mm,
and you've been through it, right? Was your primary research back then, and now it's 2024, and there's just so much anxiety that people feel, so much worry and fear, Um, and I feel like you have a lot of wisdom to share with us
mm,
because you kind of course, experienced it as a human, as an American,
yeah.
once already, and you're experiencing it again. But also, you were able to build bridges and kind of see from like a totem pole perspective. Oh, this is what's happening in the country.
Mm, mm.
So yeah, would you have any thoughts around that and how curiosity can support people at this moment?
Yeah, and it's not just the US, the whole world is really going through an
Yeah.
election year. I think more than 4 billion people are voting this year, and or the polarization that's happening politically isn't just here, it's all across the world. And
Yeah.
yeah,
France, India, Germany, yeah, you name
yeah,
it.
it's like, yeah,
Philippines, yeah.
exactly. And so I think that, my big, obviously, like, no surprise, my big sort of recommendation is to come from a place of curiosity as much as you can in the election year. But then the question is, okay, how do I actually do that?
How do you do that? How do you be
How do I
curious?
be curious? What does that look like? So a couple of like sort of suggestions. One is to I call this in the book quicksanding, which is the idea when you're caught in like quicksand in the desert, when you are flailing and you're struggling and you're fighting, you're actually going to sink further and faster into the quicksand. What you really need to do is to become spacious and to take deep breaths and to become really buoyant. And that actually will allow you to, kick your feet and eventually get to the surface and get out of the quicksand. So if you ever find yourself in quicksand in the desert, that's how you get out. You don't struggle and flail. You actually take deep breaths and you relax into it, and you be really mindful of your breath and really fill your lungs with buoyancy. And so, I think that's a great first step. Taking, just a couple of minutes to like be with your breath, either, sitting down if that works for you. That doesn't for me. So what I typically do is I'll go on a curiosity walk, and I'll just like walk around in a neighborhood or like in a park or wherever you would like to go. I like to go to nature spaces, but not everyone has access to that, unfortunately. But if you do have access to that, that's like a great place to do it. And just notice things that are around you. Notice and name them in your mind. Like, oh, that's a bird, or like, that's a whatever, a cactus, a cacti. Like, just start to name things. Oh, there's a neighbor. Oh, like, and then start getting really curious about what's around
Yeah.
you. And doing that for 10 minutes, you don't even need to talk to anyone. You can be in your own experience if that's what you feel most comfortable with. But that really helps for you to not only get into your breath, but it also gets you into this mindset of being aware of what's around you. And actually, as a trauma healing mechanism, this is called noticing objects. And it's like what trauma therapists will tell you to do when you go through traumas. You just go around and notice objects and name them. And I think it works in a very similar way. Curiosity was told to me by a trauma therapist, Kevin Becker. Curiosity is a barometer for healing. And so many of us need to do that work of creating spaciousness and healing ourselves even before we go into a conversation where there's going to be a lot of differences at that family reunion or on that dinner party or that PTA conference or whatever it is. So how do we take deep breaths? How do we like start to do the work of healing, right? And it can be in simple ways like doing a curiosity walk. I think the second piece is bringing in really thoughtful, like intent into the way that we're moving into, a situation where there might be a lot of political differences. So in sports psychologists, we'll call this mental rehearsal. So if you're an elite athlete, let's say you're a gymnast, you don't just like show up on the floor and you're like, I'm going to do my routine now. You actually like will close your eyes and almost like visualize yourself going through that routine, and it improves your performance on the day of. They've replicated this across sports. Sports psychologists have found the same to be true with free throws in basketball, or for hitting a baseball with a baseball bat. The same is true also for curiosity. You can actually close your eyes before you get into a conversation with your in-laws or your cousin or whoever it is, and think about, what is this conversation going to look like? How am I going to take care of myself, be well fed, be well rested? What are the kinds of questions I'm going to ask? Where are we when we're having this kind of a conversation? Or are we even having a dialogue or conversation, or are we doing something together, where we're able to, relate in a different way besides just words, like making something, service, making art, whatever. So I think intent's a really big thing. And then I think the third piece that I would say is really the art of knowing how to ask deeper questions that aren't slipping into what I call predatory curiosity, which is when you're asking questions for an agenda or for a reason underneath it, right? So you're like, asking all these questions about who they're voting for, like why they're voting for that person or what issues they care about. And then you're like, gotcha. Like, I knew you were going to say that. Well, let me just tell you like the list of different things on why you're wrong, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's not real curiosity.
Yeah.
That is what a prosecutor or detective does. That's predatory curiosity. You're trying to change the person. You cannot change other people with curiosity.
Amen.
This is about understanding people. It is about
Yes.
increasing your connection with them, and
Yeah.
maybe even changing yourself and
Yes.
transforming your own views. And so if you focus on curiosity in that way, the types of the questions that you're asking really change, and the reasons why you're asking those questions really change.
Yeah.
So moving away from more shallow curiosity questions, like what's your name, who are you voting for, like what do you, where do you live, to deeper curious questions, like instead of what's your name, what's the story of your name? Instead of who are you voting for, what are the values that are important to you? Tell me about the stories that, remind you of a sense of belonging, or what it means for you to, be in community in this world, instead of what do you do for work, like what's really exciting you right now in life? What are you getting curious about in life? And then you start to see a person in their full humanity. And that's going to, curiosity on the research side reduces hostility, and it reduces a lot of the negative emotions that come with a conversation across politics or differences. And so if we can bring that into the conversation and relationship, we're going to have a much, much better outcome where we're not going to be screaming at each other or like canceling each other on social, or, like being like, I just can't talk about this anymore. Let's just not talk at all, or like not bring this up at all. Right. We have to be able to engage with each other. And I think those are great tips.
I think thank you so much. These are wonderful tips. And I hope all of you were taking notes, because I certainly was. And, this idea of quickstanding. I mean, I also do that in the pool. I recently learned how to swim, and that's the second I get super stiff, I'm like sinking, and then I'm like, oh, breathe, relax, right? But what I really loved about what you shared is that really, this is not about changing people. Like and I really sincerely believe that the only person we can truly change is ourselves, and then we can lead by example. And I feel like curiosity gives us that tool to, of course, extend ourselves grace, but also extend that grace to others, and then ultimately accept people for the decision they make, whether it's political decisions or decisions around, their lives and their livelihoods. And that's one of the challenges, right? Because a lot of us want to control others, whether it's in our families or in our communities or in our workplaces, and really surrendering and releasing that.
And that, the type of power that we should all be wielding isn't necessarily control, but it actually, curiosity is a superpower. It is something that gives us and the people around us so much. The benefits are, it increases our intimacy and our closeness with the people around us. It also helps us to understand people who are very different from us, which means that we're able to move through the world with less bias, and reduces our anxiety too. That's why, when you are fearful of something, let's say it's death or spiders or whatever it is, you come into contact with it, you get curious about it, and through that exposure over and over, and with guidance, and in a container that's supporting that exposure and contact, you're able to be like, why am I afraid of spiders, or why am I actually afraid of death, when these are such meaningful parts of our ecosystem or our lifespan? And you start to restory, the things that you were told as a kid, or that you were once believing to be true, and you start to expand, your understanding of life in the world. And like, that's so incredible that curiosity has that power to do that. And it's a gift. You can actually give people curiosity, because like I said, it's contagious. Curiosity is contagious. So when you are curious towards someone, it is more likely they're going to be curious back towards you. So if you're ever like, gosh, like, why can't this person just understand where I'm coming from? Well, the question I would ask you is, are you first understanding where they're coming from? And why does this have to be a transactional relationship where you are curious to them, so that person's going to be curious towards you? There's so many other ways of imagining reciprocity, where you could be curious towards them, they could be curious towards someone else, and then eventually, like, someone will become curious towards you, that has nothing to do with this person, but that
Yeah.
gives you that same sense of feeling seen and heard and valued, because
Yeah.
that is what curiosity is at the end of the day. It's love, but it's really about us reminding people that they matter, that you are, your voice, your perspective, your stories, who you are as a person really matters. And so I want to gift that to as many people as possible. And I receive that from so many people. I like to tell
Yeah.
people the question, who is someone that was curious towards you, who made you feel seen and heard and like you mattered?
Mhm.
Like, tell me about them. What's their name? What were they like? Are they, what's your relationship to them? And it always just like lights people's eyes up, because they're like, oh my gosh, like I can't wait to tell you the person that was curious towards me and that made me feel like I mattered. I mean, those are the people that we hold closely to our
Yeah.
life, to our stories. Those are the people we talk about in our lives that we want to share with each other. So it makes sense that this is like a value that we want to bring into our relationships. We want to, give people that gift of being seen,
Wow.
feeling like they matter.
So beautiful. It's just like making me like giddy inside and just like smiling inside. I think my cheeks hurt because I'm like, I have such a wide
Yeah.
smile. Um, so, okay, we're coming to a close. And before I ask you just to kind of any closing thoughts, let's actually answer that question if you're willing and able. Um, if you're willing to share, who is that one person who was curious towards you,
Mm,
um, and made you feel seen?
mm,
And if you can
mm.
just share a little bit of a story around that.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. There's, and, I think there's so many. I think I'm going to check in with the one that feels ripe for me to share right now.
Yeah.
I remember my grandma, who was a very, very important human person in my life. I grew up in her house, basically. It was like an intergenerational household. And, I remember she would pull me aside, and she did not even graduate from middle school, but she was wise and smart beyond her years. I mean, she was just like such a, she was amazing. She was a G. I love her so much. And she would say, I was like, a black sheep, in society, and I was different. And, that's okay to be that way. There's like a power in that. And, I hadn't even like come to terms with my, like, or not come to terms, but I hadn't even like recognized my sexuality or
Yeah.
what made me different. But I had
Yeah.
this model of a person, an elder, who was telling me that difference is actually your power. That
Yeah.
difference is not something that's isolating, but it's actually something that's going to help you move through the world and
Mm,
understand so many other people around you. And not only that, but you're not alone. Like, I
mm,
feel this way too and have felt this way too. And to see
mm.
someone so strong, she was like so strong. She worked in a laundromat and a fish factory basically her whole life. She is like one of the strongest humans ever. And she's just like, and I felt that way, And so
Yeah.
to have that communicated to me, to reframe strength and what that actually,
Mhm.
because I, as a young boy, was getting different narratives of what strength looks like, right?
Yeah.
Which I think many of us can relate to, that moment when like someone might pull us aside and be like, don't you cry, don't you cry
I
right now.
know, right?
But it's like to see instead saying like, oh no, like these emotions I'm feeling, the sensitivity I have, my artsiness, the weirdness that I have in the world as like a 9-year-old, a 7-year-old, however old I was when I had that conversation with her, is something to be valued and something to be cherished. And she made me
Yeah.
feel so seen. And I think that's why curiosity really starts in the household. It starts in the home.
Mm,
It starts with, your nieces, your nephews, your children, your siblings, your grandparents, your grandkids. Like, how can you start at the heart of the home, and
mhm.
then start to, grow your curiosity towards others,
Yeah.
beyond that. What about for you? Who is someone that's
Yeah.
made you feel seen and heard and like you mattered?
Yeah. Well, thank you. I wasn't expected to be asked that, but I wanted to say one thing about grandma. For me, like just even having that image of her being a strong woman, right, who was at a fish factory, I'm like, oh, that's stereotype replacement right here, right?
Mm,
Just thinking about reframing and
mm,
creating alternative mental models. So thank you for that. And
mm,
I think for me, it would be one of my dearest friends and mentors and advisors who's been with me on this journey for like 15 years, Susan Davis. So
mm,
she is this incredible advocate, had been. She's retired now, leading a lot of anti-poverty efforts around the world, mostly for women. And she was the first person I told I was gay, and she had asked me that, with deep curiosity. And she's the one who introduced me to Middle Church, by the way. And for me, like, going to church is, it's not just, I'm very interspiritual, right? So, and she knew that, and she supported that with curiosity. Because she was like, well, who are you? Like, what do you want? Right? Those are the types of questions she asks. But I think, going back to one of the examples you shared, these questions were asked not in a predatory way, but in a really empathetic way, in a container, probably like your grandmother, right? Where I knew I was safe with her. I knew I could trust her. Of course, I absolutely do. 15 years later. But yeah, so that's kind of the power of curiosity that you're describing.
And I think Susan and Grandma Irene, they had deep love for us. You know what I mean? And I think that their curiosity was very heart-centered and fueled by that love. And so, I feel like they would have been friends.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you so much, Scott. This was so much fun. Do you have any closing thoughts for?
Well, I wanted you to share the thing we put into the parking lot of the community garden, which is, you said that curiosity, is such a deep part of, breaking bias. And I wanted to understand that from your mind and heart.
It's such a great question. And, basically, PRISM tools, I feel like we've talked about all 5 of these PRISM tools in our conversation, but individuation is that particular tool for me. And, basically what happens is, oftentimes I go to social events, and the first assumption that folks make just by looking at me is that I work in IT, or, I'm an engineer or a doctor. I'm none of those things, right? But it's because the mental model they have of someone who looks like me with my name is one of that one particular profession, right? And for me, so on their end, it could be curiosity. There's, 2 billion people that look like me. They're not all engineers, right? So, like, expanding that aperture of curiosity and really meeting Anu for who he is. But then also for me, this has been a really important practice, is to not kick those people out of my hearts and really be curious with them. Like, see them, whether they're Bob or Angela or, Rowan, for who Bob, Angela, or Rowan are versus my ideas of them based on the questions they've asked me. And that's tough, right? For someone who has various intersectional subordinated identities. And that's the work, because that's how we built bridges across separation. And then they also shared stories of how they've been stereotyped. I'll say one of my mentors in law school, really wonderful guy, quiet, tall white guy from Minnesota. And one of the things he shared with me in confidence, again, curiosity was a part of this, is that he is a China expert, basically. So he speaks fluent Chinese, was doing a lot of China law and Chinese, international Chinese law. But every time he was in the classroom or in, like, smaller seminars, because of his phenotype, everyone looked to him to be the leader of the group. And he said that was really uncomfortable, because I am someone who likes to sit in the back and observe. Like, I'm not a leader. And, like, he knew that about himself, but for him to even say that and acknowledge that, unconscious bias that he was experiencing and all his life is really powerful, right? Because sometimes we think that, oh my gosh, like, the dominant group always wins out, but there's always some harm that can be caused, because that pressure that one feels to lead when one isn't ready for it can turn into mental health or physical health problems, and often does, right? In terms of stress, depression, anxiety, you name it. And this is where curiosity really helped him, bring self-love and self-compassion to himself and hold those boundaries, like, oh no, I don't want to do this. And, notice that you're probably asking me because I'm the only white guy who's tall in this room.
Right. Yeah. Like, that's so interesting. It's like we hold these perspectives about people, and that just might not be true. Like, it's like not everyone wants to have kids, like, not everyone is going to get married. Like not everyone, deems themselves as political. You know what I mean? Like there's so many like ways to be in the world, and we can sometimes be really quick to operate off of those like automatic judgments. But what would it look like if we really turned towards them with curiosity and not made those assumptions, but instead, brought those kinds of questions towards them, really got to see who this person is, and also reframe some of those mental models we have even around like leadership. I'm like, quiet leadership is great, like we don't have to be like extroverted and like out in the middle of the pack. Like leadership shows up in so many different ways. So it just starts to shift all of the ways that we think about our lives and culture. This is like, I see the connection points now more clearly from what you're sharing. That's beautiful.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being with us, and we'll share more about 𝐚𝐭𝐜𝐡 and everything and the resources. And any last words for our viewers?
Yeah, I think I just want to end by saying that, curiosity is earned. It is not deserved, because just because you're interested or curious about someone's culture or their hair or whether they're pregnant or not, like does not mean that you're entitled to that information. It does not mean that you deserve the privilege of that information. Curiosity is earned. It is not deserved. You have to have the trust in the relationship. Curiosity only killed the cat because it was hella invasive and it was like nosy. You know what I mean? So, but if your curiosity is tempered because you're asking yourself questions like, why am I being curious? Is it really just to get to know this person, understand them, or am I trying to, change them? Or if you're asking yourself, am I the right person to be curious? Is this the right time to be curious? Or do you know when to stop or slow down your curiosity? If at first you're having a great conversation, but then you bring up something like kids and they start to not share as much, to listen to those verbal and nonverbal cues people are giving you instead of steamrolling them, and to recognize people have boundaries and to, give them that same grace. I think curiosity can't exist without grace and without that recognition that it's earned. So I just wanted to end with that, because I don't want people to have this picture of like kumbaya curiosity. I'm going to ask everyone every deep ass question, like, what's your deepest childhood trauma, when I first meet them? Like, that's not what I'm talking about. Although some people would be down to talk about that, including me. But we have to respect everyone's coming into a conversation relationship with a different set of comfort and privacy and values.
So beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you, Scott.
Yeah. Thanks. Yay. This is so beautiful.
Yay.
Thanks for having me.